Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a look at the sources you send us, and today, wow, what a mix. We've got everything from classical philosophy, Plato, Cicero, all the way to 19th century success gurus, modern psychology, even activist speeches. Quite the collection.
It really is. And our job, as always, is to kind of weave these threads together. We're digging into how individuals manage to, well, rise up and make an impact. How do they build agency, exert influence? Whether that's about building wealth, holding on to your moral compass, or, pushing for big social changes.
Yeah, the sources really pull in different directions sometimes. You've got someone like Russell Conwell talking very practically about getting rich, and then you flip the page and bam, you're with Socrates talking about how doing wrong harms you more than the person you wrong.
Exactly. So the mission today is to sort of map out the anatomy of influence. What are the core pieces? What mindset do you need? What kind of character forms the foundation? And crucially, how do you communicate effectively to actually make things happen? We're pulling lessons from, well, ancient rhetoric, business ethics, psychology, activism. It's all in there.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the most grounded idea here, this concept that's really stuck around. Russell Conwell's acres of diamonds. It's meant to be a wake-up call, isn't it? The idea that maybe the big opportunities aren't far away, they're right here.
Precisely. It's fascinating because Conwell apparently gave this lecture thousands of times. Over 5,000, I think the figure is.
Wow.
And it kicks off with this story, kind of a parable about Hafiz in India. He sells his farm, everything, to go hunt for diamond mines because he heard these rumors.
And how does that work out for him?
Not well. He wanders the world, gets poorer and poorer, and eventually, tragically, dies destitute, having found nothing. The kicker, of course, is what happens back at his old farm.
Right, the person who bought the farm finds diamonds there. Is that the gist?
Pretty much. The story in its full version is a bit more elaborate, but the core message is stark. Wealth, opportunity, it's often right within the sound of your voice, as Conwell put it. It's nearby in your community, maybe even in your current job if you just, well, open your eyes to it.
It sounds simple, but why do you think people miss it? Why the constant search elsewhere?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Conwell illustrates this perfectly with another anecdote, a more detailed one, about a professor of mineralogy in Massachusetts.
Okay, so this guy should know where to find valuable stuff, right? He's a mineralogy professor.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But he gets it in his head that he needs to sell his family homestead, leave Newburyport, and go search for silver mines somewhere else. He's convinced the real wealth is distant.
Let me guess.
You're probably ahead of me.
Yeah.
The man who buys the property. He's just doing some mundane task, digging potatoes or something near the stone wall by the front gate, and his basket or tool hits something hard. He looks down, pulls it out, and it's this massive block of native silver, like 8 inches square, embedded right there in the wall.
No way. Right where the professor probably sat countless times.
Exactly. Conwell makes a point of saying the professor was born on that homestead, was brought up there, often sat on that wall, maybe even leaned against that very spot while making the deal to sell the place. He literally polished the opportunity with his sleeve, but couldn't see it because his mind was fixed on some far-off fantasy.
That's incredibly illustrative. It's about perception then, seeing what's actually there.
It's about perception, and it leads Conwell to his next big point, which probably sounded quite radical back then. He insists you have to carry your religion into business.
Okay, now that sounds a bit dated. What did he mean by that? Not just being pious at work, surely.
No, not really about piety in the church sense. For Conwell, it was a practical, almost hard-nosed business ethic. He claimed the foundation of godliness and the foundation principle of success in business are both the same precisely.
So ethics and success are intertwined.
Deeply. He says if you argue you can't bring your religion, meaning your honesty, your integrity, your common sense into your business dealings, you're basically telling the world one of 3 things about yourself.
A jar.
You're either an imbecile, you're heading straight for bankruptcy, or you're fundamentally a thief.
Wow, he didn't mince words.
Not at all. It sounds harsh, maybe overly judgmental to us now, but if you strip away the 19th century religious framing, he's talking about fundamental business sense, integrity and responsiveness.
How does he illustrate that?
He uses this great little story about running a country store. Imagine a farmer comes in, asks the clerk, "Do you keep jackknives?" The clerk just says no. End of story.
Okay.
Another farmer comes in, asks the same thing. "Got any jackknives?" Clerk says nope. Maybe he starts whistling, totally oblivious.
Right, not connecting the dots.
Exactly. The clerk is that imbecile Conwell mentioned. The godly plan, or what Conwell really means, is the sensible plan, the business-savvy plan, is that When the third farmer comes in asking for a jackknife, the store owner should have anticipated the demand.
Should have one ready.
Yes, you get a jackknife in stock, you recognize a need in your community, you fill it. It's not just about selling something. Conwell says you're doing that farmer a kindness, providing something they need, and in return, you get a deserved reward profit.
So live and let live, in this context, isn't passive. It's about mutual benefit through active observation and service.
Precisely. It's everyday common sense applied to business. Find the need close to home, serve it honestly, and that's where your acres of diamonds are likely to be found, not chasing some mythical silver mine far away.
Okay, so we see the opportunity nearby. We adopt an ethical, responsive mindset. But just seeing isn't enough, right? You have to act.
Absolutely. And this shifts us towards the idea of becoming a doer, not just a thinker. This resonates strongly with more modern writers, too, like Stephen Covey and his concept of the law of the harvest.
The farming metaphor. I like that one. It's very grounding.
It is. Covey points out you simply cannot cram on a farm. You can't ignore the planting season, slack off all summer, and then suddenly pull an all-nighter in October and expect a bumper crop.
Doesn't work that way.
Nature demands process. You have to prepare the soil, plant the seeds, water, weed. You have to follow the steps. The effort has to be put in consistently. You reap what you sow, always. There are no shortcuts to a real harvest.
So how does this law of the harvest apply beyond farming to, say, building influence or success?
Covey connects it to being proactive. It means focusing your energy where it can actually make a difference, which he calls your circle of influence. You identify a problem, and then you figure out, is this something I have direct control over?
Like my own habits, my own skills.
Exactly. If it's direct control, you solve it by changing yourself, your habits, your approach. Or maybe it's an indirect control problem, meaning it involves other people. You can't make them change, but you can change your methods of influence. Maybe you need to listen better. Maybe you need to persuade differently, present your case more effectively.
Okay, direct control, indirect control. What's the third type?
The third type covers problems you have no control over. Things in the past, market forces maybe, other people's fundamental choices.
So what does the proactive person do then? Just bang their head against the wall?
No, that's the reactive approach. The proactive approach, Covey argues, is to accept it. Genuinely, peacefully accept what you cannot change.
That sounds passive. Isn't agency about making things happen?
It is, but it's also about wisdom.
Yeah.
Accepting what's outside your control doesn't mean giving up. It means you stop letting that uncontrollable thing drain your energy and focus. You free up your resources to work within your actual circle of influence. It's the core idea in the Serenity Prayer, isn't it?
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
The courage to change the things I can.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
Right.
So agency isn't just about pushing, it's also about knowing where not to push.
Exactly. It's about intelligently directing your efforts. That's being proactive.
Okay, so finding the diamonds nearby, acting ethically and proactively. But what about the person doing the acting? Does the internal character matter?
Hugely. This brings us right into Covey's distinction between what he calls primary and secondary greatness. This is critical.
Primary versus secondary greatness, what's the difference?
Secondary greatness is all the external stuff. It's your social image, your reputation, maybe charm, specific skills, the techniques you use to interact. What Covey links to the personality ethic, it's how you appear.
Okay, the outward presentation. So primary greatness is...
Primary greatness is the bedrock beneath that. It's your actual character. Deep integrity, honesty, courage, fairness, your fundamental principles. It's who you are.
And the sources seem pretty clear that focusing only on the secondary stuff is a recipe for disaster long term.
Absolutely. If you try to build influence or success just on techniques, on charm, on managing impressions, the secondary things, but you lack that core integrity, that primary greatness, people eventually see through it.
The techniques feel manipulative.
Precisely. Duplicity, even if it's subtle, breeds distrust. And once trust is gone, your influence collapses. You can have the best communication skills in the world, but if people suspect your motives are purely self-serving or dishonest, those skills become liabilities. They just highlight the manipulation.
It connects back to Conwell's point about honesty in business in a way. The foundation has to be sound.
It does, and Conwell touches on this character aspect quite pointedly when he talks about inherited wealth. It's a fascinating, slightly countercultural take for a guy promoting wealth creation.
What's his critique?
Yeah.
That rich kids are spoiled?
It's deeper than that. He expresses almost pity for the son of a rich man, saying that son can never know the discipline that's earned. through struggle, through having to work your way up.
The law of the harvest, again, you can't inherit the experience of planting and tending.
Exactly. Conwell even throws out a statistic, maybe anecdotal, but powerful, claiming that in Massachusetts back then, not one rich man's son out of 17 ever dies rich.
17. That's stark. Why? Not because they liked money to start with.
No, they had the capital.
Yeah.
Conwell's point is they lack the character, the discipline, the common sense forged in the fire of having to earn it. They hadn't paid the price, follow the process.
He must have had examples.
Oh, he did. He contrasts a positive and a negative example. The positive one was supposedly the elder Vanderbilt's son.
The famous Commodore.
Right. Apparently, the story goes, the son was offered money by his father, but refused it. Instead, he deliberately went out and got a job earning just $3 a week.
Why on earth would he do that?
To gain the discipline. He felt that experience, that struggle, was worth more than a university education. He needed to build the primary greatness before handling the secondary attribute of wealth. And Conwell implies that's why he could manage the family fortune later.
Okay, so that's the positive case. What's the negative?
The negative one is almost comical, but also quite sad. Conwell calls him the human cricket, a millionaire's son visiting Niagara Falls.
A human cricket. Why?
Because of how ridiculously he was dressed and acted. Conwell paints this picture. The guy's wearing clothes that don't fit, an eyeglass he can't see through, boots he can't walk in. Just completely out of touch.
Sounds like a caricature.
It probably is, a bit, but it makes the point. The ultimate illustration of his helplessness, his lack of common sense, was when he needed to write a letter. He was at a desk, and the paper and envelopes were on another table, maybe 20 feet away.
Okay. So he gets up and gets them.
Nope. He rings for a servant to carry the paper and envelopes those 20 feet for him. 20 feet. Conwell uses this image to say the man lacked common sense, not capital. He was a travesty upon human nature because he'd never been required to develop basic competence or self-reliance. He skipped the character-building struggle.
So the discipline earned through effort is essential, not just for managing wealth, but for basic competence.
It seems to be the argument, which sets up a really interesting bridge to the philosophical deep end of our sources. Plato, Socrates.
Right. Socrates takes this idea of internal state being paramount to a whole other level. This claim that doing wrong is worse for the doer than suffering wrong. That's hard to get your head around.
It is radical. Conwell links ethics to practical success. Socrates says virtue is the success, regardless of external outcomes. His logic hinges on what you value most.
Which for Socrates is?
The state of your soul, your inner self, your character, that's the most precious thing you possess. External things, wealth, health, reputation, are secondary. Wrongdoing, injustice, dishonesty, these things damage your soul. Suffering wrong might harm your body or your wallet, but it doesn't corrupt your essential self.
So the tyrant, the person who commits crimes and gets away with it, is actually the most miserable person of all.
That's exactly Socrates' argument in the Gordius. He uses the example of Archelaus, a Macedonian ruler who supposedly gained power through terrible crimes. Socrates argues Archelaus isn't truly powerful or happy because he acts out of ignorance of what's genuinely good. He's ruined his own soul, even if he sits on a throne.
So true power isn't external control, it's internal virtue.
For Socrates, yes. Acting justly, even if it leads to suffering or death, preserves the integrity of your soul, which is the highest good. Acting unjustly, even if it brings riches or power, corrupts it, which is the greatest harm. It flips our usual understanding of harm completely upside down.
Okay, I think I'm following. This then leads to his view on punishment, right? Which is also counterintuitive.
Very. We normally think avoiding punishment is good. Socrates says the worst possible state is to do wrong and never be punished or corrected.
Why? Because the corruption just festers.
Exactly. The soul remains sick, uncured. The next best state, surprisingly, is to do wrong and be punished, to face reproof, chastisement, consequences.
Because punishment is like medicine for the soul.
That's the analogy. It's painful, but it's therapeutic. It helps cure the sickness of injustice within you, which means the happiest life, the best state of all, is the one lived justly, in accordance with virtue and discipline, ideally never needing the cure because you never committed the wrong in the first place.
So Vanderbilt Jr. choosing the $3 a week job to gain discipline, Socrates would probably nod along with that, deliberately choosing a form of suffering or struggle to strengthen character.
It aligns perfectly. Both Conwell, from a practical standpoint, and Socrates, from a philosophical one, seem to agree that character isn't given, it's earned, often through difficulty, and that internal state is fundamental.
Okay, so we've established the need for a proactive mindset, for seeing opportunity, and crucially, for this foundation of primary greatness, this strong moral character. What's next for building agency?
Well, having the right character and seeing the opportunity isn't enough if you can't communicate, if you can't influence others.
Hmm.
So the next piece is mastering the art of oratory, of rhetoric.
And the classical thinkers, Plato, Cicero, Quintilian, they had a lot to say about this. It wasn't just about smooth talking, was it?
Not at all. They were actually quite wary of mere technique. Plato Socrates, particularly in dialogues like Gorgias and Phaedrus, dismisses rhetoric without a connection to truth as just an unsystematic knack. Like cooking versus medicine, one aims to please, the other aims at genuine well-being. True rhetoric for Plato had to be grounded in philosophy, in knowing the truth.
So you have to know what you're talking about fundamentally.
Yes, and you also have to understand your audience deeply. Cicero famously said, the ideal orator needs to know, and this is a mouthful in Latin, quid suis sis, cogent sentient opponentur expectant.
Which means?
Basically what their fellow citizens are thinking, feeling, believing, and expecting. You need that deep psychological insight into your audience.
Makes sense. But there's another layer too, right? The speaker's own credibility. Ethos.
Absolutely crucial. Quintilian, a Roman educator in rhetoric, put it brilliantly. He argued that a speaker's authority, their ethos, comes primarily from their manner of life, from their character, their reputation, their perceived integrity.
Back to primary greatness again.
Exactly.
Well,
The style of eloquence, the delivery, the technique that's secondary. And Quintilian adds a really sharp warning. If the art of the speech becomes obvious, if the audience sees the technique as technique, it fails. Art should conceal art.
that feels very relevant today. You see speakers sometimes, and you can almost tick off the techniques they're using, the pregnant pause, the calculated gesture.
And the moment you notice it, you
Yeah.
disengage, right? You
Right.
feel manipulated, not persuaded.
Mhm.
The technique has obtruded itself, as Quintilian might say, and the connection is broken. Authenticity matters more.
So technique isn't bad, but it has to serve the message and feel genuine.
Yes. And poor technique can be disastrous right from the start. Quintilian had this great image comparing a bad opening of speech, a faulty exordium, to a face seamed with scars. It immediately puts the audience off. He said if you wreck the ship while leaving the harbor, you're a terrible pilot. Same if you fumble the opening of your speech.
We've all seen speakers like that. Conwell actually had a funny description of one, didn't he?
Oh, the guy stuck in the elocutionary attitude? Yes. Conwell describes this poor fellow frozen on stage, right foot at a perfect 45-degree angle, hand gesture ready, but completely locked up.
What did he say?
He just kept stammering the opening phrase over and over. Fellow citizens, we are very happy. We are
Yeah.
very happy to welcome back. Whatever substance was supposed to follow was completely lost because the delivery was so awkward and unnatural.
The exact opposite, it sounds like, of Conwell himself. People described his delivery as charismatic, right?
Apparently so. He wasn't seen as a technical performer, but as someone who possessed this mysterious faculty of imbuing others with his own happiness. His authenticity, his genuine enthusiasm was contagious, like how he'd unconsciously start leading the singing in church just by the joy on his face.
That's real connection. That's ethos in action.
It is, and it ties into something Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, observed about communication styles. He preferred conversation over grand lectures.
Why was that?
Seneca felt that big, loud lectures delivered to a crowd, spouted in the presence of a throng, had noise but lacked intimacy. Real influence, he believed, came from quieter, more direct communication.
Like a conversation.
Exactly. He said low-toned words of conversation creep by degrees into the soul and stick in the memory. They bypass our defenses more easily than a formal speech. There's less resistance, more genuine absorption.
Interesting. So effective influence might be quieter, more personal than we sometimes think.
Yeah.
It can be. But whether it's a quiet conversation or a public address, understanding how the audience thinks is vital. This brings in modern psychology, particularly cognitive biases.
Like framing effects.
Yes, framing is a huge one. The work of people like Kahneman and Tversky showed definitively that how you present information dramatically affects choices, even if the underlying facts are identical.
The classic example being the meat labeling.
Right, 90% fat-free sounds healthy and appealing. 10% fat sounds less so. Even though it's the exact same product, the frame shifts the perception from positive to negative.
And this applies in really high-stakes situations too, like medicine.
Absolutely. A surgery described with a 90% survival rate feels much safer than the same surgery described with a 10% mortality rate. The numbers are the same, But the emotional impact of the frame's survival versus death changes everything. Effective communicators understand and use framing deliberately.
What about other biases, like relying on stories over stats?
That's base rate neglect. We tend to be swayed by vivid, specific descriptions or stories, even if they contradict broader statistical facts, the base rates.
The example you mentioned earlier, Steve the meek and tidy librarian.
Yeah, that's a classic Kahneman example. You give a detailed description of Steve, shy, organized, loves reading, and ask if he's more likely a librarian or a farmer. Most people say librarian because the description fits the stereotype so well.
But statistically?
Statistically, there are vastly more male farmers than male librarians, so the base rate probability strongly favors farmer. But we ignore the stats because the vivid personality sketch creates a more coherent, easily imagined story.
So if you want to influence people, you need to understand these biases, both to use them ethically and to avoid being misled yourself.
Exactly. You need the moral foundation, the ethos. You need the technical skill understanding delivery and audience psychology, including biases like framing and base rate neglect. It's a complex package required for real agency through communication.
Okay, so we have character, we have communication. But what happens when that communication needs to confront deep-seated injustice? When agency means activism?
Then the stakes get even higher, and the rhetoric often needs to become sharper, more confrontational. We see this powerfully in figures like Sojourner Truth.
An incredible figure. She faced such immense obstacles.
Truly. As one account puts it, she combined in herself the two most hated elements of humanity. She was black and she was a woman. She was operating at the intersection of racism and sexism in 19th century America. The hostility she faced was extreme.
There's that story from the Women's Rights Convention in 1853.
In New York, yes. Apparently, the atmosphere was incredibly hostile. A mob had shown up, shouting insults, trying to disrupt the meeting.
But she remained composed.
Reports say she stood calm and dignified amidst the chaos. And there's wonderful irony. The mob had to pay a small fee to get in, and their admission fees ended up covering the convention's costs.
Huh. That's fantastic. But what about her message? What was her rhetorical approach?
It was direct, grounded, and often focused on economic parity alongside rights. She famously challenged the men in the audience about unequal pay. You men know that you get as much again as women when you write or for what you do.
Pointing out the hypocrisy right there. Equal work, unequal pay.
Yes. And she wasn't just asking for concessions. She framed it as a battle for self-sufficiency. She declared, when we have got this battle once fought, we shall not be coming to you anymore. The goal wasn't perpetual negotiation. It was equality and independence. That clarity is incredibly powerful.
That kind of clarity, that willingness to be maybe radical in the eyes of the mainstream.
Yeah.
We see that in Malcolm X too, don't we?
Absolutely. He explicitly embraced the role of the extremist. He argued it was necessary.
How so?
He believed that the more moderate civil rights leaders were only able to make progress because the extremists, like himself, were pushing the boundaries and shifting the whole conversation. They made the moderates look reasonable by comparison. It was us extremists who made it possible, he said.
He redefined the terms, like when he was called a demagogue.
Yes. That's a brilliant example of rhetorical jujitsu. When reporters tried to dismiss him with that label, he didn't just reject it. He owned it and reframed it.
What did he say?
He said, essentially, let's look at the definition. A demagogue is a teacher of the people. And then he listed historical figures who were persecuted as demagogues in their time. Socrates, Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther. He aligned himself with that tradition of challenging power and speaking uncomfortable truths, turned the insult right back around.
That takes guts and serious rhetorical skill. It's about exposing hypocrisy, isn't it? Which connects to Nelson Mandela's analysis of apartheid South Africa.
Precisely. Mandela pointed out the core injustice wasn't just that black South Africans were poor in an absolute sense or compared to other nations. The profound injustice was their poverty relative to white people within their own country.
A disparity created and enforced by law.
Exactly. He highlighted how legislation like the past laws wasn't accidental. It was systematically designed to maintain white supremacy and enforce the idea of black inferiority. This systemic injustice, he argued, was what led to the breakdown of communities, families, and the rise in violence. It wasn't inherent, it was imposed.
So these activists used rhetoric to expose the systems, the hypocrisy, the root causes. But speaking truth to power isn't always enough on its own, is it? There's the messy reality of politics and influence.
Right. And here, Russell Conwell, back to our pragmatic guru, offers a rather cynical but perhaps realistic take on how things actually work.
What was his view?
He flat out stated that countries are not run by votes, at least not individual votes alone. He said government is governed by influence,
Influence from where?
from the ambitions and the enterprises which control votes, basically economic power, organizational power. If you just cast your one vote but have no broader influence through business, organizing, lobbying, your impact is minimal. It's the underlying structures of power and enterprise that really shape political outcomes, according to Conwell.
That's a pretty stark view of democracy.
It is, but it acknowledges the role of concentrated power, which leads to the dilemma faced by figures like Theodore Roosevelt when dealing with the rise of very big business.
But the trusts, the monopolies of the early 20th century.
Exactly. Roosevelt saw that this concentrated economic power, while potentially efficient, was also a threat if completely unchecked. He argued for governmental control.
To ensure fairness?
Yes, to ensure fair play for workers, for smaller competitors, for investors, and for the public good. But he also cautioned that this control needed to be exercised with extreme care. He recognized that the mechanism of modern business is so delicate that clumsy or ignorant interference could do more harm than good.
So agency in the political sphere involves this complex balancing act between economic influence, popular will, and careful government oversight.
It seems so. It's about understanding where power really lies and how to navigate it effectively, whether you're an entrepreneur, an activist, or a political leader.
Okay, this journey requires so much. Seeing the opportunity, building character, mastering communication, confronting injustice, navigating power. It sounds exhausting. How do people sustain this? How do they build resilience?
That's the final crucial piece. Agency requires immense resilience, the ability to endure setbacks, criticism, and just the sheer difficulty of making change happen. And our sources offer insights here too, from ancient philosophy to modern psychology.
Where do we start? Maybe with managing fear. Seneca seems relevant again.
Yes, the Stoics were masters of mental resilience. Seneca's advice on facing death is a great example of cognitive reframing. Don't be terrified of death, he suggests, because no evil is great, which is the last evil of all.
Meaning its power is limited because it ends.
Exactly. Death arrives,
Right.
it would be a thing to dread if it could remain with you. Since it's transient, its ultimate power over your mind can be diminished. You cognitively shrink the threat.
That ability to reframe, to change your internal script. Anwar Sadat discovered that in prison, didn't he?
He did. A profound realization under extreme duress. He wrote that the person who cannot change the very fabric of his thought will never be able to change reality.
Wow, so the change has to start inside. The internal landscape dictates the external possibilities.
That's the core idea. You have to work on the root you're thinking, not just the least attitude or behavior. This internal work is fundamental to enduring agency.
And modern psychology seems to back this up, particularly around vulnerability.
Yes. Thinkers like Brené Brown have done fascinating work here. Research shows, for instance, that actually talking about traumatic experiences, sharing your story rather than keeping it secret, can measurably improve physical health and lower stress hormones.
Why is that?
Brown argues it's because shame thrives in secrecy. When we hide our struggles, shame festers. When we share vulnerably, we build connection, empathy, and resilience. It counteracts the isolating effect of shame.
But vulnerability is hard. It feels risky.
It does. And Brown extends this to positive emotions, too. She talks about how cultivating joy is also an act of vulnerability. It feels scary to really lean into happiness because we fear it being taken away.
We dress rehearse tragedy.
Exactly. We anticipate the worst even in good times. Brown says we need to practice gratitude and consciously allow ourselves to feel joy, because doing so builds hope and the emotional reserves we need to cope when things inevitably get tough. Resilience isn't just about gritting your teeth. It's also about cultivating positive emotional capacity.
So resilience involves managing fear, changing thought patterns, embracing vulnerability, and cultivating joy. It's an active internal process.
Very active. And it leads to this ability we see in so many successful or impactful people, the ability to treat obstacles not as roadblocks, but as, well, as material.
Ryan Holiday talks about this, right? Turning obstacles into fuel.
Yes, the obstacle is the way.
Yeah.
It's the idea that the very things that seem to block your path can become the source of energy, creativity, and strength if you approach them correctly. Obstacles become fuel for the blaze that was their ambition.
Like learning from failure instead of being crushed by it.
Precisely. Wendell Phillips, the abolitionist, had a great line. Defeat is nothing but education, nothing but the first steps to something better. It's reframing failure as iteration, as learning.
You see this in business too, don't you? People who thrive in chaos.
Absolutely. Think of someone like John D. Rockefeller during financial panics. While everyone else was losing their heads, he reportedly became calmer, saw the turmoil as an opportunity, and made shrewd investments. He was inclined to see the opportunity in every disaster.
That's the ultimate reframing, looking at crisis and asking, what can I learn? What new possibility does this open up?
That's it. That conscious mental shift diminishes the emotional weight of the negative event and allows you to maintain agency, to keep moving forward regardless of the external storm. That's resilience in action.
What a journey. We've covered so much ground trying to dissect this idea of agency, from finding those acres of diamonds right under our feet.
By being observant, ethical, and proactive, yeah. And connecting that practical wisdom all the way to the deep moral foundations laid out by Socrates. The idea that character, that primary greatness, is paramount.
And seeing how that internal strength fuels the powerful voices of activists like Sojourner Truth and Malcolm X, who used brilliant rhetoric not just to persuade, but to confront and expose systemic injustice.
It really seems to boil down to an alignment, doesn't it? Aligning that inner core, the character, the integrity, with focused, disciplined action in the world, and then articulating it all with skill, authenticity, and an understanding of how influence actually works.
Without that alignment, it seems the whole structure is weak. Conwell's success lacks foundation. Socrates' virtue lacks impact. Truth's demands lack credibility if the pieces aren't integrated.
Right. The character has to underpin the action and the communication.
Yeah.
If you have brilliant technique but lack primary greatness, it just comes across as manipulation and ultimately it fails.
Which brings us back to that warning from the classical rhetoricians, doesn't it? Quintilian, Plato. They worried about speakers who mastered the technique but lacked the grounding in truth or virtue.
They did. They were concerned about oratory becoming mere performance, aimed at applause rather than genuine persuasion based on a solid manner of life. And that raises a challenging question for us today, I think.
Okay, let's hear it. What's the final thought for our listeners to chew on?
Well, we celebrate historical figures who shape the world with their words, powered by conviction. But think about our current culture, with its intense focus on image, on fame, on technique, on what Covey called secondary greatness. Are we, perhaps, running the risk that Quintilian feared?
That our focus on the performance makes our voices impotent, lacking real weight.
Potentially. Is it possible that the biggest obstacle to us achieving the influence or the success we seek isn't actually out there in the world? Not a lack of opportunity, not the system being rigged, but maybe it's closer to home. Maybe it's our own lack of deep sincerity, our reluctance to fully commit to those primary principles, to do the hard work of building that internal character first.
That willingness to undergo the discipline, maybe even the suffering, that Socrates and Conwell in their different ways suggested was necessary to forge that character. Is that the real bottleneck for agency today?
It's something to consider. How much of our effort goes into polishing the surface versus strengthening the core? That might be the ultimate question of the anatomy of agency.